The mansion was quiet, as it often was on evenings like this. The servants moved through the hallways, performing their tasks with precision, and the grand dining room was filled with expensive china and crystal glasses. The guests had begun arriving for the CEO's lavish dinner party, and the staff was bustling around, making sure everything was perfect. Among the staff was a young maid who moved with quiet efficiency. Her name was known to few, and she rarely spoke outside of the tasks she was assigned. She had been hired by the CEO's family to take care of the house, to clean and organize, to serve and ensure the guests were comfortable. Day after day, she went through her duties without complaint, always staying in the background, never drawing attention to herself. Her days were often long, spent cleaning and preparing the home, and in the evenings, she would retreat to her small quarters in the back of the mansion. Here there was little noise, only the hum of the air conditioning and the soft click of the clock. It was in this silence that she would take comfort. She spent her free time in the corner of the small room, by a grand piano that had been left there long ago, gathering dust. The piano had once belonged to the family, a symbol of their wealth and sophistication. Over time, it had become just another piece of furniture, forgotten and unused. The maid, however, had always been drawn to it. As a child, she had dreamed of becoming a musician. She had spent hours learning how to play, teaching herself melodies she had heard on the radio. She wasn't a professional, but she had talent. But life, as it often does, had taken a different path. The maid's dreams had been set aside in favor of responsibility. Her family had needed money, and when the opportunity arose for her to work in the mansion, she had taken it without a second thought. The piano, once a source of joy, had become a distant memory. Tonight, however, things were different. The CEO's wife had come up with an idea to entertain the guests, an idea that made the maid's heart skip a beat. It started with a casual remark over dinner. The CEO's wife had been speaking with a group of friends, laughing and joking about how bored everyone seemed. "Why don't we have some entertainment?" she had suggested, scanning the room. "Does anyone have a talent they'd like to share?" There were polite chuckles, but no one volunteered. The guests, all wealthy and influential, seemed uninterested in doing anything so ordinary as play an instrument or sing. That's when the CEO's wife had turned to the maid, who was standing by the door ready to serve drinks. "Why don't you play something for us?" she had asked with a grin. The tone of the question was light, almost dismissive, as if she were simply making a joke. She had no idea that the maid, who had spent years in the background, actually had a talent she had kept hidden. The maid froze. Her hands, which had been poised to serve drinks, suddenly felt heavy. Her heart raced. She wasn't sure if she had heard correctly. Was the CEO's wife really asking her to perform? In front of everyone? The guests had fallen silent, waiting for the maid's response. She looked at the grand piano sitting silently in the corner of the room, and then at the CEO's wife, who was still smiling at her with that amused, almost playful expression. I'm not sure I should," the maid replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, come on," the CEO's wife insisted, laughing lightly. "You're not shy, are you? We could use a little entertainment to liven things up." There was an awkward pause, and the maid felt the eyes of the guests on her. She felt the weight of their gazes, their curiosity, and their expectations. She had never been the center of attention, and the thought of playing the piano for all of them seemed impossible. But then something strange happened. She didn't know what came over her, but she made a decision. "I'll play," she said, surprising even herself. The room seemed to hold its breath as the maid walked over to the piano. The sound of her shoes on the floor echoed in the stillness. She sat down slowly, her fingers brushing the ivory keys, and took a deep breath. The guests murmured amongst themselves, not expecting much from the maid, who was, after all, just the hired help. They likely expected her to play a simple tune, something light and easy to entertain them for a few moments. They didn't know what she was capable of. She placed her fingers on the keys and began to play. It wasn't a simple tune. The notes that came from the piano were rich and complex, filled with emotion. The maid had chosen a piece she had composed herself, a song she had written in her quiet moments when no one was around to hear her. It wasn't a song for others. It was a song for her. As the music filled the room, something changed. The guests, who had been whispering and shifting in their seats, suddenly became still. The CEO's wife, who had asked her to play, looked stunned. She wasn't expecting this. The melody was haunting, beautiful, and unlike anything she had imagined. The maid's fingers moved fluidly across the keys, lost in the music. She could feel the emotion flowing through her. The years of loneliness, the hours of practicing by herself, the dreams she had once held close. It all came out in the music, pouring out from her fingertips in a way she had never experienced before. The CEO, who had been sitting at the head of the table, had been talking with a business associate when he first heard the music. At first he didn't pay much attention, but soon the sound of the piano began to seep into his consciousness. It wasn't just the notes he was hearing, it was the feeling behind them. It wasn't the kind of music one could ignore. The music reached him in a way he wasn't prepared for. He had been so caught up in the demands of his work, his empire, and his busy life that he had forgotten what it felt like to truly feel something. To hear something that touched his soul. The CEO fell silent, his attention drawn to the maid at the piano. He didn't know who she was, what her story was, or how she had learned to play. All he knew was that the music was stirring something deep inside him. The guests, too, were quiet now. The laughter and chatter had stopped, replaced by the quiet sound of the piano. The maid's music had captured everyone's attention. It was more than just entertainment. It was an experience. For the first time, the maid wasn't just the servant in the background. She wasn't just a part of the scenery. She was someone who had something to offer. Something beautiful. Something real. And though she didn't know it yet, this simple moment, this small act of playing the piano was about to change everything. The room was still. The only sound the gentle echo of the piano keys that seemed to linger in the air. The guests, who had once been animated and chatty, were now mesmerized by the music. No one moved, no one spoke, no one dared to disturb the moment. It felt as if time itself had paused, all attention focused on the maid at the piano. She played with a quiet intensity, her fingers gliding over the keys, lost in the music. It was as though she was no longer in the room, no longer a maid in a grand mansion. She was somewhere else, somewhere private and personal, pouring all of her feelings into each note. There was a story behind every chord, a part of her soul in every melody. It was the kind of music that carried weight, that reached deep into a person's heart without them even realizing it. At first, the guests were unsure of what to make of it. It wasn't the light, playful tune they had been expecting, but as the music continued, they slowly began to understand. It was different. It was powerful. The notes weren't just sounds. They were emotions, feelings, experiences she had lived and loved and lost. The CEO, who had been focused on his business dealings just moments before, found himself suddenly pulled into the melody. He stopped talking, his attention entirely fixed on the maid. It was as though the music had wrapped itself around him, making it impossible for him to look away. For a brief moment, he felt a pang of guilt, like he had been missing something important for a long time. His life had become a blur of meetings, decisions, and deadlines. He had buried himself in work, away from the things that once brought him joy. But now, as the maid's fingers danced across the keys, he was reminded of something he had forgotten. The power of art, of music, of simple beauty. He glanced around the room, noticing that no one else had moved either. The guests were just as captivated as he was. The maid, who had been nothing more than a shadow in the background, had become the heart of the evening, the center of attention, not because she was performing for them, but because her music had reached them in a way nothing else could. The CEO was torn. He had spent so many years building his empire, and in that time he had become disconnected from his own emotions. He had built walls around himself, walls that kept him from feeling too much, from caring too deeply. But the music had torn those walls down. He could feel himself on the edge of something he hadn't felt in years. Vulnerability. The maid played on, unaware of the effect her music was having on those around her. She wasn't playing for the guests. She wasn't playing for anyone. She was playing for herself. It was the only way she knew how to express herself, to release the thoughts and emotions that had built up inside her over the years. As she played, memories flashed through her mind. She thought about her childhood, the music lessons she could never afford, the dreams she had of one day becoming a famous musician. She thought about the time she had spent alone, practicing on the piano, teaching herself songs from old sheet music, or just letting her fingers create whatever melody came to mind. The piano had always been her escape, her refuge from a world that often felt too big, too loud, and too demanding. But tonight she wasn't playing to escape. She wasn't playing to hide. Tonight she was playing because it felt like the right thing to do. Her hands moved almost automatically now, lost in the rhythm of the piece. The longer she played, the more she felt the music seep into her, flowing through her like a current. It was almost as if the piano were alive, breathing with her, sharing in her emotions. It was an intimate moment, one that only she and the music could fully understand. And yet the room had become a part of it. The guests, who had expected something far more trivial, were now being swept up in the same tide. They too were starting to understand, starting to feel what the maid had put into the music. The CEO wiped at his eyes, blinking away a sudden surge of emotion. He hadn't realized he was on the edge of tears. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of what was happening. This wasn't just a performance. This wasn't something to be critiqued or judged. It was a moment of raw honesty, a fleeting glimpse into the heart of a person who had been hidden in plain sight for so long. He had been so caught up in the demands of his own life, in the endless cycle of work and success, that he had forgotten how to feel, forgotten how to connect with anything beyond his business, his accomplishments, his goals. But the music? The music had done what nothing else could. It had reached inside him, stirring something he thought he had lost. As the final notes rang out, there was silence, complete silence. The maid's hands lingered on the keys as though reluctant to stop, as though the music still had something to say. It took a few moments for anyone to react. Then slowly the CEO stood up. His chair scraped against the floor, the sound almost too loud after the quiet music. He didn't speak at first, unsure of what to say. He felt a lump form in his throat. Finally he cleared his throat, his voice hoarse as he addressed the room. "That was," he began, but his words failed him. He didn't have the words to express what he was feeling. What could he say to capture the power of that moment? The way the music had filled the room, the way it had filled him. The guests exchanged glances, unsure how to react. They too had been moved, but the experience was so different from what they had expected. It wasn't just entertainment. It was something deeper, something more personal. The CEO looked at the maid, his gaze softening. He took a step toward her, his hands clasped in front of him, a silent gesture of respect. He could see her now, not just as the maid, not just as an employee, but as someone with a depth he hadn't known existed. Someone who had a gift, a talent that deserved recognition. The maid, still sitting at the piano, felt a sudden wave of embarrassment. She had not intended to capture anyone's attention, let alone stir up such emotion. She had simply wanted to play, to express herself through music. But now, with the CEO standing before her, she realized that what had started as a simple performance had turned into something much more significant. She wasn't just a maid in that moment. She was a musician, an artist. The CEO swallowed hard, his voice coming out more clearly now. "That was beautiful," he said quietly. "I don't think I've ever heard anything like it." The maid looked up at him, her face flushed with a mixture of surprise and uncertainty. She'd always been told that her music wasn't good enough, that it was just a hobby, a dream that couldn't be real. But here, in front of the CEO and his guests, her music had been acknowledged. For the first time in years, she felt like her talent had been seen for what it was. Her heart raced as she spoke, her voice trembling. "Thank you," she said, barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to. I didn't think." The CEO smiled, the tears that had threatened to fall now replaced by a look of admiration. "You have a gift," he said, "and I think the world needs to hear it." The silence in the room was thick, almost suffocating. The maid, still seated at the piano, felt the weight of the CEO's words hanging in the air. She had never expected anything like this to happen. Never imagined that her simple, impromptu performance would have such an impact. She had just wanted to play, to express something that words could never capture, something that had been building up inside her for years. And yet here she was at the center of attention, with everyone looking at her as if she were someone entirely different. It felt surreal, like she was watching herself from the outside. She hadn't wanted this, hadn't prepared for this. She was just a maid, just someone who cleaned, who served. She was nothing special. But the CEO's words had shattered that perception. He had said she had a gift. The world needed to hear her music. The world. She looked up at him, meeting his gaze for the first time since the performance had ended. His expression was sincere, filled with something that looked like admiration, even awe. It made her feel small, yet somehow bigger than she had ever felt before. She had spent so long hiding behind her duties, behind the walls she had built around herself, that to be seen like this felt overwhelming. The guests, who had been polite and somewhat indifferent before, were now quietly murmuring among themselves. Some of them had already left the room while others remained, unable to tear themselves away from the unexpected turn of events. The room had been transformed. The evening had started as just another gathering, another formal dinner and a long line of them, but now it felt like something much more, something important. The maid's fingers still rested on the piano keys, her body frozen in place, unsure of what to do next. She had never been good at handling attention. She had spent her life avoiding it, staying in the background, doing her job without ever asking for recognition. But tonight something had shifted. She had shared a piece of herself with these people, and they had responded. They had listened. She slowly pulled her hands away from the piano, her palms feeling warm against the cold keys. She stood up, her legs trembling slightly beneath her. She was unsure whether she should leave the room, disappear back into the shadows, or stay and face the reality of what had just happened. Before she could make a decision, the CEO stepped forward. His voice, still soft but filled with determination, broke the silence once more. "Why don't you come with me?" he asked. "I want to talk to you." The maid blinked, momentarily taken aback. She hadn't expected that. She had expected him to simply acknowledge her talent and then move on. But the way he spoke, gently, without the usual air of authority he carried in his business dealings, made her pause. Without waiting for her response, the CEO turned and walked toward the door, gesturing for her to follow. The maid hesitated for only a moment before she followed him out of the room, her mind racing with a mix of confusion and curiosity. The CEO led her down the long hallway of the mansion, past rooms filled with lavish furnishings and portraits of the family's ancestors. It was strange walking through the house without her usual sense of purpose. Normally she would be cleaning, organizing, preparing meals, but now she was simply walking, her footsteps echoing in the silence. He led her to a quiet study at the end of the hall. The room was dimly lit, with heavy curtains drawn against the fading light outside. Shelves filled with books lined the walls, and the scent of aged paper hung in the air. The CEO motioned for her to sit in one of the chairs by the window. "Please sit," he said. "This will only take a minute." The maid did as instructed, feeling awkward and out of place in the unfamiliar surroundings. She had never been in this room before. She had never been asked to sit in the same space as the CEO. It felt like a breach of some unspoken rule, a boundary she had never crossed. But tonight, everything was different. The CEO sat across from her, his posture relaxed, though there was a look of intensity in his eyes. He studied her for a moment, as if trying to understand something about her that he hadn't seen before. "I don't know your story," he began, his voice steady but curious. "I don't know what you've been through, but I know what I heard tonight, what I felt." He paused, as if searching for the right words. "You have something inside you, a gift, and I don't think you should hide it anymore." The maid swallowed hard. She had never been one to share her past, never felt comfortable opening up to others. Her life had always been a quiet, private affair, but the CEO's words had hit something deep inside her, something she hadn't realized had been lying dormant for so long. You think so?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. The CEO nodded. "I know so. You've been hiding behind your duties for too long, but what you did tonight, what you showed us, it was powerful. People like you," he continued, "they don't stay in the background. They don't stay hidden. You have something the world needs to hear." The maid's heart raced, her breath catching in her throat. She had never thought of herself that way. She had never considered that her music could be anything more than a personal outlet, a way to express herself when the world around her felt too harsh or too demanding. I don't know where to start," she admitted, her voice small. "I'm just a maid. I don't have the resources, the connections. I never had the chance to pursue music the way I wanted to. I never thought I could." The CEO leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. "You don't need resources or connections to start. You already have everything you need." He paused for a moment, considering his next words carefully. "I can help you," he said. "I can give you the opportunity to do what you love. If you're willing to take the chance. The maid blinked, her mind reeling. But how? How could you help me? The CEO smiled, a slight, reassuring smile. There's a lot I can do. Music schools, performance opportunities. I can get you the training you need. Help you find the right people. But that's all secondary. What matters is that you want to take that step. That you want to use your gift not just for yourself, but for the world. The maid stared at him, her mind racing. This was a world she had never imagined entering. A world of opportunities and possibilities she had always believed were out of reach. She had spent so many years convincing herself that her dreams were unrealistic, that her talent was nothing more than a fleeting fancy. But now here was someone who believed in her, someone who was offering her a chance to make those dreams a reality. Her thoughts swirled around in her head. Could she do it? Could she really take that leap? Could she leave behind everything she had known and step into a world that was so different from the one she had grown up in? I don't know, she said finally, her voice trembling. I've spent so long. I don't know if I can. I don't know if I'm ready. The CEO's expression softened. You don't have to be ready right now, he said gently. This is your decision. I'm not asking you to make it overnight, but I'm offering you a chance to change your life, to change your future. The maid sat in silence, the weight of his words sinking in. This was more than just an offer. It was a lifeline, a chance for something more, for a life she had only dreamed about. And though she wasn't sure if she was ready, she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't go back to the way things were. Not after tonight. She looked up at the CEO, a sense of determination slowly building within her. I'll think about it, she said, her voice steady now. But I'll need time. This is a big decision. The CEO nodded, understanding. Take all the time you need, he said. Just know that when you're ready, I'll be here to help. And in that moment, the maid realized that her life was about to change. Forever. The days following that night felt surreal to the maid. It had only been a short time since her impromptu performance in front of the guests, and yet, everything about her life seemed to be shifting. The mansion, once a place where she simply moved from room to room, performing her duties with quiet efficiency, now felt different. She no longer blended into the background. People began to look at her differently, as if they saw her not just as the maid, but as someone with a story, someone with a future that could be far bigger than anyone had ever imagined. But it wasn't just the change in how others saw her that made things feel strange. It was the way she saw herself. For so long, she had defined herself by her role in the household. She was the maid. She cleaned, she served, and she stayed in the shadows. That was her place. That was who she was, but now she was something more. She was a person with a gift, with the potential for something greater. The CEO's words echoed in her mind. You have a gift. The world needs to hear your music. It sounded so simple when he said it. But the more she thought about it, the more overwhelming it became. She had always dreamed of being a musician, but she had never dared to believe it could be more than just a dream. Her life had been shaped by practicalities. She had responsibilities, a family to support, and a job that kept her busy every day. Music was just something she did in her spare time, something she enjoyed when the world grew too loud. It was an escape, not a path. And now, this offer from the CEO, this chance to pursue music professionally, felt both exciting and terrifying. Could she really take that step? Could she really walk away from everything she had known and step into something so uncertain? The thought of it filled her with a mix of hope and fear, and every time she tried to imagine it, her mind would spiral into doubt. She spent the following days trying to decide what to do. She didn't talk to anyone about it, not even the other servants in the household. This was something personal, something that required her to think deeply. One evening, as she was cleaning the large dining room, her hands moving automatically as they wiped down the polished surface of the grand table, the CEO entered the room. She hadn't heard him approach, but she felt his presence the moment he walked in. Good evening, he said, his voice warm and inviting, just as it had been the first time they'd spoken in the study. Good evening, sir, she replied, standing up straight as she turned to face him. There was a moment of silence between them, and then the CEO spoke again, his tone more serious this time. I've been thinking a lot about what we discussed the other day, he began, and I wanted to give you some time to think it over. But I also wanted to make sure you know that I'm still here to help, Whenever you're ready." He paused, as if giving her space to respond. The maid swallowed, her heart racing. She had known he would ask her about it again, but now that the moment was here, she felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She wasn't sure what to say. She had been thinking about it constantly, weighing the possibilities in her mind, but nothing seemed clear. I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "It's just a big decision. I've never really thought about pursuing music. It's always been something I did for myself, something I did to escape. But now it feels different, and I don't know if I'm ready for all of that." The CEO nodded slowly, understanding her hesitation. He stepped a little closer, but didn't invade her personal space. He wasn't trying to pressure her. He was simply offering support, a steady presence in the midst of her uncertainty. "I understand," he said. "It's a big leap and it's not something to take lightly. But I want you to know that there's no pressure. You don't have to decide anything right now. You can take your time. I just want you to remember that you have an opportunity here, an opportunity that not everyone gets." The maid looked at him, feeling both comforted and overwhelmed. The offer was genuine and he seemed to care. But how could she walk away from everything she had known? How could she possibly start over in a world so different from the one she had built for herself? "I don't know if I can leave all of this behind," she said softly, glancing around the room. "I've spent so long in this house doing this work. I'm used to it. It's what I know." The CEO smiled gently, his expression kind. "I get it, and I'm not asking you to leave everything behind. Music doesn't mean you have to give up everything you've built. It's just another part of who you are. You can take both with you. You can have both." The maid was quiet for a long time. She thought about the piano in her small room, the way it had felt to play that night, the way the music had seemed to flow effortlessly from her fingers. She thought about the dreams she had once had, the dreams that had been buried under the weight of responsibility. Could she still reach for those dreams? Could she still make them real? The decision felt like an enormous weight on her shoulders. Every part of her wanted to say yes, to step into a new life, a life filled with music and possibility. But another part of her was scared. Scared of failure. Scared of the unknown. Scared of leaving behind the only life she had ever known. "I need more time," she said finally, her voice steady, but filled with uncertainty. "I'm not ready to make this decision yet." The CEO nodded, his face showing no sign of disappointment. He respected her need for time. He wasn't going to rush her. "Take all the time you need," he said. "I'm not going anywhere. I'll be here whenever you're ready." The maid thanked him quietly, her mind racing. She had hoped the decision would become easier with time, but instead, it felt like it had only become harder. She didn't know how long it would take for her to feel ready, or if she would ever feel ready. The next few days passed in a blur of uncertainty. The maid continued her work as usual, moving through the motions of her duties, but her thoughts kept returning to the piano. Every time she walked past it in the corner of her small room, she felt a tug in her chest, a quiet reminder of the dreams she had kept hidden for so long. The other servants began to notice the change in her. They had seen the way the CEO had spoken to her that day, the way he had looked at her with a kind of respect they rarely saw directed toward anyone in the household. Whispers started to circulate among the staff. Some wondered if the maid would really leave, if she would really pursue her music. Others were skeptical. They had seen people come and go in the mansion over the years, and they knew how quickly dreams could be crushed by the weight of reality. But the maid couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing inside her. She felt it every time she sat at the piano, every time she allowed herself to imagine a future where she could be more than just the maid in the background. She still wasn't sure what that future looked like. But she knew one thing. She couldn't go back to the way things were. Not after everything she had experienced, not after the music had filled the room that night. There was a part of her that knew, deep down, that this was the moment when she had to decide whether to continue hiding or to step forward and claim the life she had always dreamed of. And as much as the fear and uncertainty gripped her heart, she couldn't deny the pull of something greater. Music had always been her escape, her way of feeling alive. But now it was offering her something more. A chance to be seen, a chance to be heard, a chance to truly live. The days stretched into weeks, and with each passing moment, the maid felt the weight of her decision pulling her in different directions. It wasn't just about music anymore. It wasn't just about her dream. It was about the person she had become in the process. She had spent so many years defining herself by what she did for others, by the duties she performed. But now something was shifting inside her. She was beginning to realize that the person she had been was not the person she had to stay. Her life had always been centered around routine, around expectations. But now those routines felt suffocating. It was as though she could see the walls closing in on her. She had to choose. She had to decide whether she would continue to live in the shadows of other people's lives, or whether she would step into the light, even if it meant facing the unknown. The decision wasn't an easy one. Every time she sat at the piano, every time her fingers touched the keys, she felt that pull, that longing to do more, to be more. But fear lingered in the back of her mind, a quiet voice telling her that dreams were for other people, not for someone like her. She had spent so many years convincing herself that her place was here, in this house, that the idea of stepping away felt like an impossible leap. It was on a rainy afternoon, when the house was quiet and the sound of the storm outside filled the air, that she found herself standing in front of the piano once again. Her fingers brushed the cold keys and she felt a wave of emotion rush over her. It was as though the music was calling to her, reminding her of everything she had once hoped for and everything she was afraid of losing. She closed her eyes and began to play. This time the music was different. It wasn't just a performance. It wasn't a moment for anyone else. It was for her. For the first time in a long while, she played without worrying about what others would think. She let the music flow freely without hesitation. She played through the doubt, through the fear, and for the first time she felt a sense of clarity. When she finished, the room was still. She sat there for a few moments, her hands resting on the keys, taking in the silence. It was then that she realized something. She had been holding herself back, waiting for the perfect moment, waiting for someone to give her permission to chase her dreams. But the truth was, the moment would never come. She was the one who had to make the choice. She was the one who had to take the first step. It wasn't going to be easy. She knew that. There would be challenges, obstacles, and a world that might not always support her. But she also knew that if she didn't take this chance now, she would regret it forever. She stood up from the piano, her heart pounding in her chest. She made her decision. She wasn't going to wait anymore. She was going to chase her dreams. She was going to take the leap, even if she didn't know exactly where it would take her. The next morning, she went to the CEO's office. The mansion was bustling with activity as usual, but today, she felt a sense of purpose she hadn't felt before. She had made up her mind and she wasn't turning back. The CEO looked up from his desk as she entered, his expression neutral but curious. He had been waiting for this moment, knowing that she needed time to decide, but also knowing that the decision would come when she was ready. "Good morning," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "Good morning, sir," she replied, her voice steady. There was a moment of silence between them, and then she spoke, her words coming out slowly but with conviction. "I've thought about it," she said. "I've spent a lot of time thinking about what you said, about the opportunity you offered, and I've made my decision." The CEO didn't say anything at first. He simply waited, his gaze fixed on her as if giving her the space to speak her truth. "I'm going to take the chance," she continued. "I'm going to pursue music. I don't know exactly where it will lead, but I know that I can't stay here, doing what I've always done, pretending that this is enough for me." The CEO's face softened, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. "I knew you would come to this decision when the time was right, and I'm here to help you every step of the way." For the first time in a long while, the maid felt a sense of relief wash over her. It was as though the weight of the world had been lifted from her shoulders. She wasn't alone in this. She had someone who believed in her, who saw her potential and was willing to help her reach it. In the days that followed, everything seemed to fall into place. The CEO kept his word, making connections for her, helping her get in touch with music schools and mentors who could guide her on her journey. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while she felt ready to face it. She enrolled in a prestigious music academy, where she began to train rigorously. Her teachers recognized her natural talent and were amazed by her ability to express emotion through music. But it wasn't just her talent that set her apart, it was her passion. She poured her heart into every lesson, every practice session, and soon she began to perform in small venues, sharing her music with a wider audience. With each performance, she grew more confident. The nerves that had once held her back began to fade, replaced by a deep sense of purpose. She wasn't just playing music anymore. She was telling a story, sharing a piece of her soul with every note she played. As the months passed, her reputation began to grow. She was invited to perform at more prestigious events, and soon, her name became known beyond the small circles she had once inhabited. Her music began to touch people in ways she had never imagined. She received letters from people who had been moved by her performances, people who found comfort in the emotions she conveyed through her music. But even with all the success, she never forgot where she came from. She never forgot the moments of doubt, the times when she had wondered if she was good enough, if she deserved this chance. And she never forgot the people who had helped her along the way, the CEO, who had believed in her when no one else did, and the mentors who had guided her with patience and encouragement. One evening, after a particularly moving performance, she found herself standing backstage, catching her breath. She had just finished playing a piece that had taken everything out of her, a piece that had come from deep within her heart. She felt a tap on her shoulder and turned to find the CEO standing there, a proud smile on his face. "You were incredible," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "I knew you had it in you." She smiled back, her eyes shining with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said. "You gave me the chance when no one else would. You made all of this possible." The CEO nodded. "You did it yourself. All I did was show you the door. You were the one who walked through it." And in that moment, the maid, the woman who had once been hidden in the shadows, realized that her journey had only just begun. She had taken the leap and the world was waiting for her. The first time she stepped onto the stage for a large concert, the maid, now a pianist, an artist, couldn't help but feel a wave of anxiety. Her heart raced and her hands trembled just slightly as she adjusted the piano bench. The audience filled the grand hall, their faces a blur of expectation and excitement. She had performed in small venues before, but nothing like this. Nothing that would make her feel so vulnerable, so exposed. As the stage lights illuminated the keys of the grand piano in front of her, she paused for a moment to steady her breathing. She was about to play a piece that she had written herself, a composition born from years of struggle, uncertainty, and dreams that she never thought would come true. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, working tirelessly to perfect every note, every phrase. It wasn't just a performance, it was a statement, a testament to everything she had overcome to get to this point. She closed her eyes briefly and thought back to the moment when she had first made the decision to follow her dreams. How terrified she had been, how many times she had wanted to give up, to turn back, to return to the safety of her old life. But now, standing on this stage, she felt something different. She felt a deep sense of peace. This was her moment. This was what she had worked for, and nothing, no fear, no doubt, could take it away from her. When she began to play, the notes flowed from her fingers effortlessly, as if they had always been there, waiting for the right moment to be released. The music filled the hall, enveloping the audience in its beauty and emotion. It was as though each note was a part of her soul, shared with everyone who was listening. It wasn't just the skill she had developed over the years. It was the passion, the raw emotion that came through in every single chord. As she played, she felt the connection with the audience. She wasn't just performing for them. She was sharing something deeply personal. The quiet moments of the piece spoke to the struggles she had faced, the pain she had endured, while the more powerful sections were filled with the triumph of overcoming those obstacles. It was a story told not with words, but with music. The audience sat in stunned silence, completely engrossed in the performance. She could feel their attention, their energy, as if they were holding their breath with her, waiting for each new note to unfold. It was a feeling she had never experienced before, a feeling of being truly seen, truly heard. It was different from the nervous anticipation she had felt during her earlier performances. This was something more, a shared experience, a bond between her and the audience. When the final note echoed through the hall, she held it for just a moment longer, allowing the sound to linger in the air. Then, as the last vibrations faded, she opened her eyes. The room was still, the silence hanging like a delicate thread. It felt like time had stopped. And then, as if on cue, the audience erupted into applause. The applause was overwhelming, deafening even. It was as though they were acknowledging not just her performance, but everything she had gone through to get to this moment. The struggles, the doubts, the sacrifices, all of it had led her here. And now she was standing in the light, receiving the recognition she had never dared to dream of. Tears welled up in her eyes as she stood to acknowledge the applause. She bowed deeply, overwhelmed by the support and admiration that surrounded her. She had always dreamed of this moment, but now that it had arrived, it felt even more beautiful and more surreal than she could have ever imagined. Backstage, as she changed into more comfortable clothes, her thoughts swirled with excitement and gratitude. The world that had once seemed so distant, so unattainable, was now within her reach. She had done it. She had taken the leap, and she had landed exactly where she was meant to be. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. She quickly checked the screen and smiled when she saw the message. It was from the CEO, the man who had given her the push she needed, who had seen something in her when no one else had. His message was simple, but it meant the world to her. Incredible performance. You've come so far. I'm proud of you. It was more than just words. It was the recognition of her hard work, of the journey she had taken, and of the person she had become. It was a reminder that she was no longer just the maid, no longer just someone who existed in the background. She was a musician, an artist, someone whose music had touched the hearts of many, and none of it would have been possible without the chance he had given her. As she walked out of the backstage area to join the others in the green room, she was greeted by a flurry of congratulations. Fellow musicians, event organizers, and even some of the audience members who had stayed behind to speak with her all expressed their admiration. It was overwhelming, but in the best way possible. She felt like she was finally being seen for who she truly was. And yet, despite the recognition, despite the applause, she knew that this was just the beginning. She had come a long way, but there was still so much more to learn, so much more to experience. The road ahead was filled with opportunities, but also challenges. She knew that she would have to keep pushing herself, keep growing as an artist if she wanted to continue down this path. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of the future. She was excited for it. Weeks passed and her career continued to gain momentum. She performed in more venues, her music reaching more people. With each performance, she grew more confident in her abilities, more sure of her place in the world. She received invitations to collaborate with other musicians, to perform in front of larger audiences, and to compose for films and commercials. Her name was starting to appear in music magazines, and soon she was recognized not just for her talent, but for her unique story. She had become an inspiration to others, people who had faced their own struggles, who had felt trapped in lives they hadn't chosen, but who, like her, had found the courage to chase their dreams. She received messages from fans, from young musicians, thanking her for showing them that anything was possible if they were willing to work for it. It was humbling, and it reminded her of how far she had come. One evening, after a particularly successful performance, the CEO reached out to her again. He invited her to dinner to celebrate her success, to talk about her future and what she hoped to achieve next. They met at a quiet restaurant, where they shared a meal and reminisced about the journey that had brought them both here. I knew from the moment you sat at that piano for the first time that you had something special, he said, his voice filled with pride. But I never imagined you would get this far. You've exceeded every expectation. The maid, the pianist, smiled. I never imagined it either. But I think I've finally found my place. The CEO raised his glass in a toast. To you, he said. To the future. As the evening drew to a close, the maid couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the chance she had been given, for the people who had believed in her, and for the music that had always been a part of her. She had come so far, but she knew that the best was yet to come. The road ahead was still long, but it was a road she was ready to travel. And as she walked out into the cool night air, she realized that for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of the future. She was ready to embrace it, to chase her dreams with everything she had. Because after all, she had already taken the hardest step. The years went by quickly, but they were filled with so much change. The maid, now known as a talented pianist, found herself in a world that was nothing like the one she had left behind. The music industry was demanding, challenging, and unpredictable, but she had never felt more alive. She continued to perform in front of packed audiences, each time feeling the nerves and excitement of being on stage. But now the nerves didn't overwhelm her as they once had. Instead, they fueled her passion, igniting something deeper within her that she hadn't fully understood until now. The music had become a part of her, not just a way to express herself, but a way to connect with the world. It was her voice in a world that often felt too loud. Despite her growing success, the Maid, now a woman who had completely transformed her life, never forgot where she came from. She hadn't let the fame, the applause, or the accolades change who she was at her core. She was still the same person, with the same quiet strength and humility that had defined her before. But now there was more to her story, and she was ready to share it with the world. One day, while in the middle of a tour, she received a message that made her pause. It was from the CEO, the man who had changed everything for her, who had given her a chance when no one else had. The message was simple, but it made her heart race. "I've been thinking about you. I want to help you with something. Let's meet. I believe there's a project we can work on together." She read the message over and over, wondering what it could mean. The CEO had been a constant source of support, but they hadn't spoken much recently. Their paths had diverged as she focused on her career and he on his own ventures. She was curious, but also cautious. What could he want now? Despite her hesitation, she replied and agreed to meet. They arranged to meet at a quiet cafe, far from the bustling streets and flashing lights of the city. When she arrived, she spotted him sitting at a table by the window, a calm smile on his face as he saw her enter. "Good to see you again," he said, standing to greet her. There was no formal handshake this time, just a warm nod of recognition. "Good to see you too," she replied, sitting down across from him. There was a slight tension in the air, a mixture of familiarity and curiosity. He wasted no time in getting to the point. "I've been following your progress, and I couldn't be more proud of you. You've done amazing things, but I think there's something more we can do." She raised an eyebrow, unsure where this conversation was going. "What do you mean?" The CEO leaned forward, his voice filled with a quiet intensity. "I want to help you take your music to the next level. You've been playing in smaller venues, performing in front of intimate audiences, but I believe you can reach more people. I want to help you create an album, a collection of your music that tells your story, that speaks to the people who need to hear it." She stared at him for a moment, unsure of how to respond. It sounded incredible, a dream come true, but at the same time it felt like a huge step, one that required even more commitment than she had already given. She had been focused on performing, on honing her craft, and now the idea of recording an album felt like an entirely new challenge. "I don't know," she said slowly. "It sounds amazing, but I've never done something like that before. An album. It's a lot of work, a lot of pressure. I've been comfortable with my performances, but this feels different." The CEO smiled gently, understanding her hesitation. "I know it's a big leap, but I believe in you. You've already shown that you can do things people didn't expect. This is just another step in that journey, and I'll be here to support you every step of the way." She sat back in her chair, her mind racing. It wasn't just about the music anymore. It was about taking everything she had worked for and putting it into something permanent, something that would last. The thought was daunting, but also incredibly exciting. This was her chance to leave a legacy, to create something that would outlast her performances, something that could inspire people for years to come. The CEO continued, "We'll start small. We'll gather the best producers, the best musicians to work with you. But this album, it'll be yours. You'll have complete creative control. I just want to make sure you have the tools you need to make it happen." She nodded slowly, absorbing his words. "I'll need time to think about it," she said quietly. "It's a big decision." "I understand," he said, his tone kind. "Take all the time you need. Just know that the opportunity is here, and it's waiting for you." The conversation shifted after that, moving to lighter topics, but the weight of the offer stayed with her. As she left the cafe, her thoughts were a whirlwind. Could she really do it? Could she create an album that captured everything she wanted to say through music? She had always been a performer, but creating something that would be recorded and distributed felt like a whole new world. That night, as she sat in her hotel room, she stared at the empty piano in the corner. She had written so many pieces over the years, but they had always been private, pieces she played for herself, to express what words couldn't. But now, the idea of sharing those personal compositions with the world was both thrilling and terrifying. She had the talent, She knew that. But did she have the courage to make this leap? The next day, she made the decision. She would take the chance. She would create the album. She called the CEO's office and let them know. Within days, the planning began. They assembled a team of musicians, producers, and sound engineers who would help her bring her vision to life. Every detail was discussed, from the concept of the album to the type of music she wanted to include. For the first time, she found herself in a world where her ideas were the starting point, not someone else's. In the studio, she worked tirelessly. There were long hours, late nights, and countless takes as she poured her heart into each song, but there was also an excitement, an energy that she hadn't expected. Every time she sat at the piano, she felt as if she was discovering something new about herself, as if the music was revealing parts of her soul she hadn't even known existed. But it wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt. There were times when she felt overwhelmed by the pressure, when the weight of creating something so permanent seemed too heavy. She questioned whether she was really ready, whether she could meet the expectations that others had for her. But each time she felt like giving up, she reminded herself of the path she had already traveled, the years of struggle, the sacrifices, the journey that had brought her to this point. She had overcome so much to get here. This was just another step. Months passed and the album began to take shape. It wasn't just a collection of songs, it was a story, a journey. Each piece was connected to the next, creating a narrative that reflected her life, her struggles, and her triumphs. There were moments of sorrow and moments of joy, but through it all, there was a thread of hope that ran through every note. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the album was complete. It was everything she had hoped it would be and more. It was raw, it was real, and it was hers. The album was released to the public and the response was overwhelming. It didn't take long for people to take notice. Her story, the story of a maid who had become a celebrated pianist, resonated with people around the world. She had touched their hearts and they had responded with love and support. It wasn't just a musical success. It was a personal victory. She had faced her fears, taken the leap, and come out on the other side stronger than ever. And as she looked back on her journey, she realized that the real success wasn't in the fame or the accolades. It was in the person she had become, the person who had found the courage to follow her dreams no matter how impossible they had seemed.